Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host, Maqbool, with you at PTV World. In today's show, we're going to be taking a look at two important stories. The first is in reference to the current economic situation of the country. And of course, we've seen that after the elections in Pakistan, this has been one of the most priority areas and has been previously as well. But of course, a big challenge for the country moving forward as to how exactly are they going to be able to engage with the kind of tough measures that are required to turn around the current economic situation, particularly in terms of engagement with the IMF and the extended fund facility. But there's also, of course, concern with regards to what the numbers are indicating and what the outlook for the next fiscal year looks like, and also, of course, the remaining fiscal year. The World Bank has come out with its report, which has talked about a number of areas which are of concern in terms of what Pakistan is going to face, and most notably, of course, the fact that more than 10 million people are also going to be added to the people below the poverty line. And this is, of course, a staggering number in terms of the number of people who are already dealing with this and are already below the poverty line, and of course also then facing the high cost of living and inflation, which also is something that is of huge concern and is projected to be at 26% till the end of the financial year. And then, of course, there's also the 1.8% growth rate, which is far less compared to what the projections had earlier been, or what, of course, is the concern with regards to the IMF negotiations as well. How exactly will Pakistan be able to move forward on this path of economic recovery, and simultaneously what efforts are going to be put in place to ensure that there is poverty alleviation that also helps the people deal with the current situation? We're going to try and take a look at that in our show today, in terms of where we stand today, and also in terms of how this is going to align with our negotiations with the IMF and what can be done to at least put the country on the right path for progress. Our next segment is going to take a look at the situation in Gaza. Of course, since October, we've seen that this genocide is continuing in Gaza, and of course, Pakistan and a number of other countries and people all around the world have been continuously talking about the kind of atrocities that have been incurred on the people of Gaza, and of course, the way that a humanitarian crisis is unfolding since October, and the way this genocide that is continuing, in which hospitals, children, women are being targeted by Israel. And this is, of course, something that has been put on various international platforms, including the UN, that has also passed a resolution, despite which we have seen that there is little to nothing that is happening on ground, and the suffering of the people continues. We've seen most recently that an aid convoy, which was pre-approved, has been targeted 3 times in airstrikes by Israel that have later, of course, claimed that this was something that has happened as part of the collateral damage in war, and that this is something that they're trying to do, is to target so-called terrorists. And this is not something that was part of the plan, but something that they have ordered an inquiry into. Again, this is a number of just one of many such occasions that have happened in the past as well, where Israel has claimed to do so. But what exactly needs to be done about it in terms of the way that the situation on ground is deteriorating, how the people are suffering, and how, unfortunately, aid is also not reaching them and is being targeted specifically by Israeli forces. So we're going to take a look at that in our next segment of the show today and try and understand what's happening. For this and more, as always, in the studios, I've been joined by senior analysts Farrukh, Pitafi and Raja Faisal. And for our first segment, we've been joined by Mr. Salman, Executive Director, Prime. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us and being a part of the discussion. Ali Sahab, I'll start with you with reference to the World Bank report and the way that we've seen it talk about the current outlook and, of course, what is projected for the future of Pakistan, particularly in terms of issues regarding inflation and poverty. And I want to understand that while we talk about different factors, there's also a lot of concern in terms of where Pakistan is heading and what aspects and measures Pakistan has already undertaken. And while we talk about the fact that we have taken tough measures that are required as per the IMF, we have successfully completed the standby arrangement and are moving forward towards another program with the IMF, it seems that at least the direction is set and at least there is some improvement in one way or the other. But then you look at such reports and you feel that maybe that's not the case. Can you help us understand what's going on?
Thank you so much, Sana, for having me in your show. I think, first of all, I'd like to provide a historical perspective on the poverty and to what extent Pakistan has been successful or not successful by just looking at last 20 years of numbers in terms of poverty reduction. I'd also like to draw a comparison with Bangladesh. Now, about 20 years ago, Pakistan poverty rate, according to the cost of basic needs estimates, which are provided by PIDE, the poverty rate was above 60%. 60%, and it over the years through various uh, economic development efforts, various social safety nets, also economic growth, obviously, that by around 2018, that poverty rate in terms of headcount was brought down to about 20%, from 60 to 20%. Uh, and it was a significant, I think, progress, which was observed similarly in Bangladesh, almost similar level of poverty decline. What happened after 2018 to let's say today, 2023, 24, we see a rise of poverty numbers again, and it is now touching to almost 40%, as you also mentioned in the initial introduction. So I think there is something which is a cause of concern, that while we were progressing gradually on eradication and alleviation of poverty in let's say 20 years up till 2018, we probably missed that direction somehow around that time. And as the recent numbers, also by the World Bank, suggesting, we do not see an immediate, reduction. There is of poverty in the medium term. So I think that's the perspective. Now, you mentioned about reforms, and it is extremely important because, quoting the World Bank report, the report mentions that without reforms, there is no significant poverty reduction is possible, which is possible in the medium term. Without reforms, no poverty reduction. And what reforms the report has been mentioned also by other think tanks like PIDE, like Prime. There are, number one, the report talks about expenditure reduction. The report talks about the broadening of the tax base, also the opening of the businesses, anti-export bias, and energy sector regulations. So broadly defined reforms and sustained economic growth are the key factors through which we can actually reduce poverty and help the regain the lost track which we were doing up till 2018.
Right, Dr. Salman, thank you very much for that opening answer. Given that we are essentially talking about the social sector, let me ask you, this report actually highlights two very interesting things. One, 10 million people are at the risk of slipping below the poverty line. And on the other side, it also mentions that when inflation was 30%, at that time, minimum wage actually rose by just 5%. And that actually gives us the scope of the problem. What are the best practices to solve this conundrum? Because of course the government and the economy don't seem to be running on the all four cylinders. So when that happens, how do you ensure that these numbers don't actually keep on increasing and causing trouble to the common man?
Farrukh, I think the important thing is that what we have learned from history of our own economic development and also other nations, that sustained economic growth, continuation of business activities, job creation by the private sector, more value addition by the private sector is the only route through which we can expect the poverty to go down. And at the same time, fiscal discipline is extremely important. One of the recent reports which we published just last week mentioned that government of Pakistan has lost the track of fiscal discipline, despite of all the sort of the fiscal responsibility commitment that we made. The public debt has gone too high. It's about 75% now. It ideally should not have crossed 57% if we would look to our own targets. The monetary expansion, when you look at the monetary growth, broad money supply through the government borrowing has been increasing tremendously, far above the real economic growth, which actually eats into any improvements which Pakistani consumer household experiences through economic development. Because inflation, which has been the dominant economic trend in last 2 or 3 years, has been eating up any gains which even our salaries or incomes have registered. So at this point, at this rate of continued inflation of about at least 26%, which is also a heavy tax, inflation is a tax. I'm afraid that we do not.
That is a point well made. But my question regarding inflation versus minimum wage, how do you fix that problem? Because on one side, of course, what you have recommended is a solution and a big one, but it is a long-term solution. What do you do with the minimum wages when the inflation is so high that 5% increase does not cut it? Do you increase it to 30% or do something else?
Well, the increase of minimum wage is not the answer, because if you are increasing the minimum wage by legislation, while the productivity is not increasing, economic activity is not increasing, it adds up to the inflation. It does not reduce inflation. So that's the fundamental economic, the law which we have observed around different countries. So by raising the minimum wage, or let's say by increasing the money which we are providing through cash transfer to the poor households, is just a temporary measure, and especially increasing the minimum wage uh, when the businesses are not producing profits, the SMEs, the smaller companies, then I'm afraid it actually increase the cost of doing business and increase the inflation. So that is not the answer to the poverty, the increasing poverty numbers right now.
Yeah, Dr. Ali Salman, it's good that you are highlighting all of these aspects, especially related to inflation, because if we deeply look into it, then inflation is the is pivotal when it comes to poverty increase in the country, and of course people are going below the poverty line. More than 10 million people, they are currently actually expected to go beyond the poverty line. So if we look at the current government's decisions, especially related to IMF bailout package, and of course there were so many compromises which are being of course government is being forced to make them compromises only because of one reason, and that is to steer the economy back on the road. And if we further go deeper into the problems which are being faced by our economy, one of another problem is that gas pipeline between Pakistan and Iran, it has obviously it is seeing reservations from American side as well, and of course it is very important for Pakistan to go ahead with it, because energy losses, they need to be covered as well, because that would be crucial for our domestic production as well. When domestic production and domestic production lines are up and running, and they are provided with the adequate energy resource, then of course it would generate some kind of activity for economic activity for the people, and of course it would create jobs for people as well. So in the midst of all of these problems, what's the way forward? How to actually convince our ally country, America, that this is important for Pakistan, and at the same time how to of course present this case in front of IMF as well, so that they can be a bit lenient when it comes to giving their recommendations to Pakistan in accordance to our economic situation.
And while you are going to advise the government in Pakistan on strategy, could you also help us understand certain basics? For example, help us unpack this term that we have been using and casually throwing around, the line of basic subsistence or poverty line. What does it constitute in terms of numbers? How much money does one have that then one can say that one is above this line, otherwise not?
Right. I'll try to answer all these points quickly. I think as far as the IMF program is concerned, you're right that Pakistan has adhered to some of the basic conditions of last standby arrangement, and that's why we are seeing it will be dispersed and program would be successfully concluded. However, I think when it comes to reforms, if you look at the World Bank report, which you earlier mentioned, this report is actually a bit cautious on how much reforms have Pakistan actually followed from the IMF program. And of course, these reports, the language is usually very diplomatic. But if you read between the lines, my inference is that Pakistan has not done the kind of structural reforms, especially which was expected from caretaker government, which did not have an electoral pressure on it. So I think by and large, unfortunately, I would have to say that we have not adopted the reform program, whether it is IMF or not IMF. So that is important. Without reforms, no sustained economic growth and no poverty reduction is going to be possible. The Iran pipeline is a strategic initiative. Even if we have the gas in the pipeline, let's say in 6 months to 1 year, the problem is in the transmission and the distribution system of both the gas and the electricity. Well, now we are building up a huge circular debt in the gas sector, which was not there, let's say, 4 or 5 years ago. So while it's a good news that Pakistan should explore alternative sources of gas through its neighbors, including I have written that Pakistan should formalize its trade of petroleum with Iran, because about 20 to 30% of oil is now smuggled actually from Iran, so we can formalize it. But going to the specifics of gas pipeline, I think the challenge would not be over just by provisioning of gas. And frankly, I think we should admit that the IMF program, while it is purely an economic program, but it is not without a geopolitical context, right? So, and when it was given, Pakistan entered into SBA, there was a particular geopolitical scenario which was developing, which was in Ukraine, which was Pakistan, it proved to be helpful for Pakistan, to be honest. So, so after withdrawal from Afghanistan, so that we needed some kind of strategic advantage, which was there. So I think it will be still played out in the next program, and probably I'm not sure how much leverage would Pakistan have on US or on IMF to get its demand being accepted. So we'll see. Now, on Farrukh, your point of poverty headcount or poverty line estimation, the last estimation was provided by Tide, was about 5 years ago, and it says the cost of basic needs includes cost of food and non-food items, and it was about 3,700 rupees expenditures per adult per month, about 22,000 rupees per household on average. But if you look at the inflation in last few years, in my sort of back of the envelope calculation, I think it is about 50,000 rupees per month household level. So if you are earning less than that, you will be counted poor.
Right.
So, with that kind of number, perhaps, Sana, then a lot more people might be below poverty line than we actually at this moment calculate. Over to you, Sana.
Right, Dr. Ali, with reference to what we're discussing, particularly in terms of poverty alleviation, I want to understand that while we talk about larger projects such as the Iran gas pipeline project or other projects which are bringing in more money in the country and more FDI and more direct investment, I want to understand whether or not this, by default, in the current system, would mean improvement in poverty alleviation in Pakistan, because when we talk about reforms, unfortunately, this is something that evades us, and in a lot of ways we haven't really seen the kind of reforms that are needed, and it sort of becomes booked in something that should be done, and that's about it. But I want to understand, if we put that aside for a moment, and in more simplistic terms, just look at where we're standing today, will more money coming in Pakistan automatically mean poverty reduction in the current way of things?
Right. Let me actually add a spin here. Do you think that trickle-down theory works in Pakistan? And if it doesn't, why not? Regarding the lack of reforms, it seems that the common man is being killed every month by OGRA and gas authorities who keep on increasing prices. and yet despite that you tell us that there is still circular debt and there is no reform. So what are we to make of it?
Well, I think first of all, the trickle down effect, right? I know it's a very controversial and contested term, but I believe in that. I believe it happens, and I believe it. I mean, it's history. China, Bangladesh, India, even Pakistan. Pakistan has experienced that. I provided you number of last 20 years poverty reduction from 60% to 20%, despite of an economic growth trajectory which was not sustained like in other countries I mentioned. It was like ups and downs, but we managed to successfully alleviate poverty, bring a significant number out of poverty line. To an extent to a 20%, but then we lost the track again. So it is possible, and we can also do it. I'm very positive about it if we do the right things. And we have talked about it already, so I think I'm not going to mention why reforms are important, sustained growth is important. So that is what we, I think, need to just go back. And I'm sorry, I lost the track of the first question.
Right. Let me repeat that. So I want to understand that if we put and understand the absolute necessity of reforms, but if we just sort of put that aside for a second, just because unfortunately this isn't something that we have seen in the past, and somehow always something that we talk about should happen, but it doesn't for one reason or the other. I want to understand in the current way of things, or in the system that's actually working, will more money coming in through foreign direct investment or any other source, and we talk about large projects, will automatically result in poverty reduction?
And if not, what are the variables? What are the variables that are needed? Very quickly, add to this as well, sir.
Yeah, I think in short, yes. When the FDI is going to result into projects which add to the economic activity, then certainly it helps the more job creation. But if the FDI is just coming for large-scale infrastructure projects, as we have seen in the case of CPAC, we have not seen large job creation as a result of it. So I think infrastructure is just sort of one stepping stone, but it is not the ultimate solution. We need the involvement of the private sector. We need linkages. Let's say we're talking about CPAC 2, so we need Pakistani firms to be part of that whole development and investment process, without which this investment in the infrastructure can become, and to some extent it has become, a liability rather than an asset for Pakistan's economic growth.
Yeah, Dr. Salman, if we look at the real estate sector, I mean, FDIs poured in Pakistan, of course, during the Musharraf era and the post-Musharraf era. Of course, Pakistan's economy, it actually benefited from overseas Pakistanis. They were buying houses in Pakistan in different real estate establishments, and then they were, of course, having different plots as well. All of this, of course, it was a positive factor in Pakistan's economy. Right now, it is being said that, of course, real estate is being hit largely. This sector is being hit largely. So what are the factors which are actually contributing in this, and why real estate sector is not booming right now?
I mean, I think the answer is that we need to differentiate between real estate development, as in development of plots. My friend Shahid Mahmood, an economist, calls Pakistan a plotistan also, versus construction. So while we have seen a lot of investment, you're right, and savings going into the plots, and even not plots, files, so not even plots, that has not helped the kind of investment which is needed. We need more construction. We need more, urban concentration in large cities in Pakistan. We need more high-rise kind of structure, which we are not seeing in that speed that we want to. And we want more retail complexes being built in, and so the construction is important. But right now there was just sort of, I think, in about three or 4 years ago, there was this tax incentive which was provided to the contractors, And as we saw as a result some activity, but that was not sustained after that those incentives were suspended. So we need to look into what is happening. But I think in the absence of the regulations, again, reform, we will see, unfortunately, the savings going into the plots rather than into the construction, which we need to certainly move into.
Yeah. And Dr. Salman, very quickly, do you think Pakistan must improve its technical education sector as well? Because if we, track down Pakistan's overseas employments, especially in the Gulf countries, I mean, they were recipient of Pakistan's skilled workers and the labor class as well. But now there are more labor than, of course, the skilled class. Do you think that we need to improve our technical education system as well so that we can produce more workforce that can be adjusted in the Gulf countries?
And Dr. Saab, this relates to this question. Has there been a proper audit of the results of organizations like TEFTA for that matter?
Yes. Farrukh, I think your voice was a bit echoing, but I'll try to answer the question here. The obviously there is no one can deny the importance of increasing the technical vocational education. An important statistic to remember is that despite all the TAFTAs and the institutions which we are seeing, we are still short in supply of trained manpower, even for Pakistan's industry at this level. So, our training institutions are unable to fulfill even Pakistan's domestic demands. And obviously, we need to go a bit another gear if we want to really go into a skilled, the demand for skilled manpower in countries like Saudi or other Gulf countries. We have not done that. And one reason, quickly I'll mention, is that the resources which we are spending on education, or especially in higher education, are completely misplaced. We are spending much more money from the public's resources to the higher education than we ought to spend in the technical and vocational. So we need to, given the fiscal constraints, we need to make that shift. We have the resources, but we need to make the shift, which we are not ready to do.
Right, Dr. Saab, I hope this time my voice is not echoing. Given that you have already spoken about TEFTA, let me also, bring up my depression or some kind of inferiority complex when it comes to comparing with India. Every year there are events in India where foreign leaders or businessmen go and praise their IITs. And we are still debating, and you're right, we spend whatever we do in higher education, but our institutions mostly are educating people on what? Subjects like Urdu adab, English literature, stuff like that, rather than focusing on tech sector. Who's stopping us from developing institutions like IIT? I know that NUST and GK and a few others have really outshined, but why are we not investing in more of those? Because we need that kind of thing.
Well, one reason is that the way our higher education sector is organized is highly bureaucratized. We do not see the autonomy which the universities should enjoy. We also see a lot of resources shortages, which has been mentioned by in various publications last few years. We want to control everything. The ministries of education at the federal level and also the provincial ministry of education want to control. They are not investing in the faculties of these institutions, which you mentioned. You mentioned the case of IITs in India. One of the hallmark features was that at complete respect of merit as far as the admission criteria, and also an investment in the faculty itself. Investment in faculty is crucial. We do not have the desired number of well trained professors in these institutions. While we have numbers, the quality is lacking as well. So I think the autonomy to the universities, more investment in the faculty, and adoption of merit in the admission criteria will be important factors to improve the higher education complex.
Right. Dr. Salman, there's also the issue when we talk about taxes, and of course tax reforms are another aspect that we keep mentioning, and there are efforts again underway to bring the retail sector within this bracket as well. And I want to understand that this is of course something that has previously been attempted as well, although unsuccessfully. This time around also it seems that there is going to be more emphasis on that, and the SIFC is also being looked at in terms of stricter implementation. But I want to understand whether or not you think this is something that's happening in a way that will fundamentally allow it to be successful, and what aspects are we looking at to ensure that it actually does happen?
We are actually again doing the same mistakes, repeating the same mistakes which government has been making in last 20-30 years when it talks to broadening of tax base and bringing the retail and wholesale sector. We are not ready to talk to them. We are not ready to listen to them that why they are not coming to the tax base, and reason is very simple, that the machinery which is responsible for it is the source of the mistrust between the taxpayers and the tax collector. So I think that relationship has to be redefined. Secondly, whenever we talk about these reforms, there was this previous attempt of fixed taxation. We miss out one fundamental factor, that unless we are able to talk about the tax rates, we are not bringing the tax rates down. We are just offering a fixed tax scheme or an advance or a minimum tax scheme, sometimes turnover schemes. So we are doing all these experiments, but we are not, really trying to see the real, the main problem. And main problem is the taxation rate is too high, given Pakistan's economy and the level of the incomes we have. I think for both general sales tax and also income tax, these rates needs to be brought down. So that we can encourage better compliance. Remember that there is a cost which all of us, especially the businesses, pay for staying outside the formal tax structure, and that cost is under the table, and other cost which we all seeing around us. So when we can bring the cost of the compliance and the cost of taxation closer to that level, you will see a lot of problems in being solved. But so far, we are not ready to take this step.
Dr. Salman, obviously, if we talk about the taxpayers, the salaried class, and very recently it was actually the figures came out that salaried class is, giving taxes around 212 billion rupees in Pakistan. But when it comes to retailers and traders, I mean, they normally are not good at paying tax, and there is no tax which is being imposed on them. Do you think that this needs to change? I mean, putting on taxes on the salaried class is eventually taking us back to our very first question, and that is increase in the poverty.
And Dr. Given that we have been talking about tax reforms, and recently the government has come up with new measures to include retailers, construction, and real estate eventually as well. How confident are you that this time these reforms are going to hold and they are going to be successful?
Well, to be honest, I'm not confident that the reforms as presented right now would be successful. First of all, we are not giving our reform plans to be thoroughly debated and discussed. The Prime Minister comes in or other agencies come in and they said, okay, let's bring a solution in 2 weeks or 1 week. Now, you can't bring a solution in 2 weeks for such an archaic level of problem. So first of all, we need to really thoroughly study the issues at hand. And as far as the salaries, the burden on salaried class is concerned, I totally, of course, echo that. I'm saying that we want to bring businesses as also responsible towards the tax payment culture, but we cannot bring them in unless we improve the overall tax structure. Of course, when we are salaried, then the taxation is directed at source. We do not have a choice, whether it's the private sector or the government organization, and that is the compulsion. But we have seen in the past, again, we need to learn from good things we have done. In around 2005, we completely, at that point in time, automated the taxation system and minimized the human interference in the system, and that doubled the tax, the tax filers at that time. Um, so we need to continue good things. We have done good things. But from, let's say, last year to now, we have again lost track. We touched about, I think, 7 million in the tax registry, which is down to 3.5 million again. So we have done good things. Why don't we do those steps again? We know what needs to be done, but we are not doing the right things.
Right. Dr. Saab, you keep talking about how we keep losing the track. And that actually brings me back to the issue of payment and a missing connection or between patriotism and tax payment, right? I remember that back in 1998 when Pakistan actually conducted its nuclear, test. At that time I was working with an organization, a newspaper, and I went to Appara and interviewed all the retailers there. What I found was that everyone was enthused. Similarly, even today, if you go there, they speak a lot about patriotism. So why is it that the government of Pakistan repeatedly keeps failing to convince them that this is their patriotic duty to A, get registered and become part of the formal economy, and then also to pay taxes regularly?
You see, I think, look, frankly, no one in the world, wants to pay tax voluntarily. You need to bring, first of all, a fair taxation system and improve the compliance and ensure that one who is failing to pay tax must be penalized. But we have done the exact opposite here. What we have done, we have introduced this marvelous idea of non-filers, right? So, okay, uh, being not paying the tax is actually legal in Pakistan because you can be a non-filer, pay a higher rate on transaction, but still can be non-filer. And so this distinction between filer and non-filer needs to be abolished. While we need to simplify the system, we abolish and we say, okay, anyone who is liable to pay tax according to income tax threshold must pay tax, and is has to exactly pay tax. And you are not paying tax, then you will be prosecuted as per the law.
And
So that's
Dr. Saab, you're right that nobody wants to pay tax, but anybody who does not want to pay tax does not pontificate and does not sermonize others on patriotism, which happens in this country. So my humble submission is, if somebody is actually lecturing us on patriotism, shouldn't they also walk the talk?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I think there's no denying the fact that we all need to contribute to the economic development of our beloved country.
Right,
But I'm
absolutely.
saying that the incentives matter, and a call to
Right.
patriotism without looking at the incentives would not help.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ali
Thank you very
Salman, for
much.
joining us and being a part of the discussion. That's all that we have time for, but we're going to be talking, of course, more in length about the situation later on in other shows as well. We're going to quickly take a look at what is going on in Gaza with reference to, of course, the kind of genocide that is continuing. There's also a lot of concern with regards to how aid convoys are being particularly targeted, and the World Central Kitchen aid convoy was targeted most recently 3 times by the Israeli forces, despite the fact that this was something that was already pre-approved and very obvious in terms of the logos of the cars that were put on the roofs as well. But of course, again, this is something that the Israeli forces have denied and said that is not something that has been done purposefully. Instead, this is just part of the way that things happen in war. And Faisal, we've seen the stance coming repeatedly from Israel before as well. But despite that, it is so clear to the world what really is going on. But is it really also clear to the people who really matter, especially the countries who really matter in terms of the way that they can actually contribute to the end of this genocide?
No, it does not, and it is not clear to the countries that matter. Of course, I'll take the name of the most important country, and that is, of course, US. US at the same time, while we know that it is dropping the aid to the people who are suffering there, but at the same time it actually is given arms to Israel to, of course, drop the bombs on the very people that are being fed by, of course, the US aid. But Sana, here obviously in recent days we have been going through lots of footages which are coming from within Gaza. First of all, Al Shifa hospital, I mean, the footage that came out, there were people who were actually being treated there. Rather than getting treated, of course, they were lined up and rounded up by the Israeli rogue military, and they were actually shot at and they were killed there, and few of them, they were dragged with their tanks, and of course tanks were killing people out there, and all of this has happened. Along with that, of course, the latest footages which are coming are related to the World Central Kitchen and the employees of World Central Kitchen. If we go through their nationality, nationalities which was being highlighted as well, they are Polish and British nationals, and of course now Poland and Britain, they are seeking justice as well. But at the same time, of course, we know that Pakistan is a country that has actually, on behalf of OIC, has gone into in UN for another resolution, and that is related to putting an embargo on Israel related to getting arms from the Western countries. I think that is a very good step forward. Somebody, of course, Pakistan is highlighting it, and Pakistan is again and again pointing out facts and wants the world's attention, and I think this is how it should be. But all I can say is we have been expecting that there will be some kind of truce, if not all the way, then at least in the month of Ramadan. That did not take place. We have been seeing more and more carnage footages coming out from Gaza, and at the same time, of course, still we are hopeful that the sense would prevail, and all we can do is hope about it. But on ground situation is worst. I mean, in recent statements which were coming out from Tel Aviv, Prime Minister of Israel, he's been, of course, saying that Rafah crossing will be bombed very soon and nobody can stop it. I mean, right now Israel is portraying itself as nobody, it's an untouchable when it comes to somebody wants to stop them or not. And I think it's all up to America right now. I mean, the statements which are coming out from Americans, they are only merely related to that we are looking into the evidences and we will decide later on, and we are constantly checking, but still we have to decide on certain aspects of the proofs which are being provided to us. So to me, I think they are not ready to accept anything. Rather, they want to keep quiet until Israel has done with Gaza.
Right. I want to understand one thing, Farrukh, because unfortunately thousands and thousands of people have lost their lives. But when it comes to certain other nationalities, it seems that the world is treating different nationalities differently. And while we talk about how our lives matter, will this be at least some way a push forward for countries like Britain and Poland, who have been part of the aid convoy, to look at things differently and maybe also have a different stance on the entire issue?
Sadly, no. Remember, Sana, in last few months, what Israel has done before our very eyes. Had it been done by any other country, God forbid some country that was on the wrong side of the West, it would have filled the registers of human rights abuses and violations and genocides and Holocaust and God knows what else. And the prosecution in the International Court of Justice and elsewhere, and ICC, by the way, would have continued for decades. But no one seems to be moved. I mean, even if the Western leadership today says that we don't approve of this, is that enough? Yeah. Is this, had it been happening anywhere else, you would have actually accepted that. All of this is happening just to placate one man. to keep him in power, and that is Benjamin Netanyahu, who has lost confidence of his own people. But what is happening now? On one side is this butchery that continues. On the other side, they are using all their media to, dehumanize the victims. And, in the start of this war, Netanyahu, actually it is not a war, it is one-way fight. One side is beating the other one to pulp. But at the start, Netanyahu quoted Bible from olden times regarding Amalek, right? A tribe that it was ordered that killed their children as well. And now there are songs that are being played on Israeli television calling the poor people who are being killed as Amalek, right? With that kind of a situation, what is happening is they are creating a new normal. Sadly, like the US invasion of Iraq, this one is another new low for the world community. And it will create the kind of precedents for other countries to follow, and forget whatever you keep on crying about Ukraine or elsewhere.
Right.
Because now any country with power is going to do exactly that and cite Israel, because Israel is still being supplied with weapons.
Right. Thank you, Farrukh. Thank you, Faisal, for joining us and being part of the discussion. That's all that we have from the show. We'll now see you tomorrow.